Hi guys, as I mentioned in my last video, I want to share with you my build guide for my Raiden of Arrows rogue. In this video, I'll go over her skills, items and aspects, paragon, leveling strategy and playstyle. My aims when planning this build were the following. 1. Make a build that puts Rain of Arrows front and center. I didn't want a build that primarily used other skills that also cast Rain of Arrows just here and there. So this build uses preparation to help reset its cooldown quicker. 2. Use a Word of Hakan unique amulet to have all 3 imbuements applied to Rain of Arrows to maximize the punch with Rain of Arrows. And 3. Use a bow rather than a crossbow to further speed up the refresh rate on Rain of Arrows with Rapid Fire. This has all come together to create a build that is a lot of fun to play, spamming Rapid Fire everywhere and casting Rain of Arrows every 15 seconds or so. And with the changes in Season 2 and the next patch, the refresh rate will be even faster than that. This build is one of my favourite Helltide farming builds and has been the most fun I've had playing Diablo 4 so far. However, a few things to keep in mind before you commit to making this build. 1. This build uses the preparation specialization, but preparation is currently bugged with range core skills and doesn't work reliably if you also use dash, shadow step and more critically, puncture. Watch my previous video here to learn more about this bug. The recent patch notes mentioned a preparation fix when using cutthroat basic skills and rapid fire, but this fix is not really relevant for this build. This video today will assume that preparation will not be fixed by this patch anyway. 2. This build is heavily reliant on Rapid Fire's improved Rapid Fire node, which refunds 15 energy when it damages a vulnerable enemy. Puncture early on is a reliable source of vulnerable, but with a bugged interaction with preparation and Rapid Fire, can make this build a little awkward in the early stages. Again, we don't know if this is fixed in the upcoming patch, so we'll assume it's not for now. I'll go over how you can get around this further in this video. And 3. This build is great for speed farming and it has a very fun gameplay loop with cooldowns frequently refreshing, but will be squishy for Nightmare 100 dungeons if you're wanting to use a Word of Hakan amulet. At least that's been the thinking up until now, where Disobedience is almost mandatory on an amulet slot. With the defense and resistances rework and a higher item power that you can reach, this will be different. Anyway, getting into the build, this build uses Rapid Fire as the core spender. Rapid Fire has great synergy with Rain of Arrows for high single target damage, and with the improved Rapid Fire node, becomes a reliable core skill to spam to trigger preparation frequently. Dash, we get to help build pace in clearing dungeons or to get around in Helltides. This also opens up the possibility of speccing into close quarters combat for extra attack speed and a huge damage boost. Concealment for all-round utility and moving faster between fights, positioning for Rain of Arrows and also serves as our only source of breaking out of hard crowd control. Enhance and subverting stealth also gives energy recovery and a way to apply additional vulnerable. Both of these are very important for this build if we're struggling with energy sustain during parts of fights. Shadow Imbuement for AoE damage while using Rapid Fire so that we're not too weak versus large groups of packs in between our Rain of Arrows cycles. For this build, we get blended Shadow Imbuement to apply more vulnerable to help us ban Rapid Fire. Poison Imbuement for improved single target damage. We also get improved Poison Imbuement for extra poison duration, and blended Poison Imbuement for extra poison damage. Rapid Fire and Poison Imbuement should be maxed out, but all of the other skills just need 1 skill rank each. And of course, finally, Rain of Arrows. Prime and Supreme Rain of Arrows are both important for this build, for the Imbuement potency boost and a knockdown effect. And lastly, this build doesn't use a basic skill at all once online, so keep that in mind. For our passives, we max out Sturdy, Agile and Debilitating Toxins for damage mitigation. Poison Imbuement and Word of Hakan apply poisoning damage to enemies, which activates Debilitating Toxins. Also max out Weapon Mastery, Exploit and Malice for extra damage, and Frigid Finesse for extra damage versus chilled and frozen enemies. This build applies chill from Word of Hakan and Penitent Greaves, so we have some steady sources of chill in this build for this. Precision Imbuement for extra crit chance. Crit damage is being heavily nerfed in the next patch, but Poison Imbuement's high poison damage on crit should behave the same as before. We're using 2 types of imbuements and Word of Hakan, so Precision Imbuement is particularly helpful. And lastly, max out Haste for additional movement speed. For the key passive, you can either go Precision for more consistent crit damage, or Close Quarters Combat for attack speed and damage. But honestly, with a buff to Close Quarters Combat now, where the damage bonus is increased, and now applies to all targets as well, Close Quarters Combat is too hard to pass up. With a maxed out setup, you can potentially reach over 400% damage versus crowd control, which at 40% of that bonus would grant you a 160% multiplicative damage bonus when Close Quarters Combat is fully active. This is absolutely huge, and can be easily set up against dungeon bosses and against groups of enemies that have been knocked down by Rain of Arrows. For items and aspects, I mentioned we use Word of Hakan, so this amulet slot is not available for disobedience or corruption aspects. Word of Hakan not only always imbues Rain of Arrows with all 3 imbuements at once, it also doesn't consume any active imbued skill charges that we currently have. This is a great quality of life for this build. The changes to Word of Hakan's cooldown bonus has been buffed to 30% max, but will only apply to Rain of Arrows and no other skills. This should really speed up the refresh rate on Rain of Arrows and in turn reset your cooldowns on your other skills faster as well. For your ranged weapon, a high roll repeating aspect is recommended for rapid fire, getting close to 90% chance for ricocheting rounds. This almost doubles rapid fire's DPS while also spreading imbuements around more evenly to avoid losing momentum during fights. Out of bows and crossbows, using a bow is highly recommended for faster preparation procs to cast Rain of Arrows more often, and casting Rain of Arrows more quickly when you do. For the other offensive aspects, accelerating aspect for even faster casting of rapid fire. Attack speed is very important for this build to recycle our cooldowns more often and reduces the risk of any vulnerable or energy downtime. Edgemaster's aspect for more damage. We have full energy most of the time, so the damage bonus from Edgemaster's performs at its peak most of the time. Aspect of Corruption for boosting our imbuement damage and to help freeze enemies hit by Rain of Arrows. For gloves, I've used Grasp of Shadows extensively. It's cool for the Shadow Clone to cast extra rapid fire volleys, but despite the stats on Grasp of Shadows being fairly well rounded, it's not the most optimal pair of gloves. And most of the time when Rain of Arrows gets cast by the Shadow Clone, it's often just for show. In the next patch, the plus core skills rank bonus will double from 3 to 6, which should make your rapid fire rounds more punchy and make the build feel better overall while Rain of Arrows is on cooldown. Your other options for gloves are Aspect of Synergy for a lower concealment cooldown duration, or Aspect of Quickening Fog to drop a smoke grenade when you dash. This can make your follower cast of Rain of Arrows safer. Whichever one you choose, just make sure you get plus 4 ranks to rapid fire, high crit chance and attack speed as a minimum. Lucky hit chance or failing that, attack speed after dodging is a great 4th mod on gloves. For defense and utility item slots, I mentioned Penitent Greaves for boots. This will help apply chill to close enemies and increase our damage to them. If you happen to come by the new Flickerstep unique boots, you can use these over Penitent Greaves to improve your Rain of Arrows cooldowns, but you do lose that chill source in between Rain of Arrows, so keep that in mind. Aspect of Disobedience for extra defense is always a priority. For Nightmare Dungeon pushing, you normally want this in your amulet slot, but with Word of Hakan, just put Disobedience on one of your armor slots. Umbrous Aspect for generating Darkshroud shadows for extra survivability. Once you start using this aspect, I suggest speccing into Subverting Darkshroud for faster movement speed as well. After this, your last aspect slot has a few options. Aspect of Audacity to periodically stun surrounding enemies is what I currently use. This, when timed well, makes your Rain of Arrows cast safer. Eluding Aspect to grant Unstoppable if you become injured while crowd controlled. I recommend this option if you're playing hardcore. Or Escape Artist Aspect to drop a smoke grenade and dodge the next few attacks. I haven't tested this one out with this build, but it has some potential to make casting Rain of Arrows safer as well. Keep in mind, most of these aspects are available in your codex. The one aspect that you should be actively farming for is Repeating Aspect. Since not only it's important to get a high roll, you should imprint this one on your bow or crossbow for the double bonus, which you'll periodically need to replace as you find higher item power weapons. For our Paragon, a couple of key points here. 1. The Exploit Glyph is particularly important for this build to really come online, as Vulnerable is also our main source of energy sustain with Rapid Fire. For Season 2, the Vampiric powers Accursed Touch and Prey on the Weak when used together can substitute as a viable replacement for the Exploit Glyph, but this hasn't been tested yet, and we don't know how early or late these Vampiric powers can come into play, so it's hard to say. And 2, because we're using Word of Hakan, you'll need to compensate for the drop in defense with more armor nodes in the Paragon. On that note, these are the recommended Paragon boards, glyphs and nodes for this build. For the starting board, we have Efficacy. Efficacy will boost a rare armor node on the starting board and will boost the potency of our imbuements with Rapid Fire and Rain of Arrows. Board number 2, Cunning Stratagem with Devious. Devious is great for boosting the damage in armor nodes and additionally increasing damage we deal to enemies that we hit. Cunning Stratagem is our second board for our Exploit Glyph placement initially, as it's the only board we pick up that has enough strength nodes in a 3-node radius to activate its effect. At least that was the case when I first made this build, but with the No Witnesses node change, does make this board more attractive to pick up now. Board number 3 is Exploit Weakness with Control. The Control Glyph is great for cranking up damage versus crowd controlled enemies, and being an intelligence glyph and our best glyph for our build, Exploit Weakness is the best spot for this glyph. Pick up the legendary node here for this board as well for that 15% additional damage. This board also can be forked off in 2 different directions for optimizing Paragon point usage. Board number 4, I used Tricks of the Trade with Exploit, but with the changes to the No Witness board, the No Witness board is a good alternative for our Rain of Arrows build. The No Witness legendary node gives us a multiplicative damage based on how much ultimate skill damage bonuses we have. This change will make our downtimes between Rain of Arrows more punchy with rapid fire, but requires more Paragon nodes to use properly, and is not as defensively geared as Tricks of the Trade. You're also tied to using Word of Akan and any gear that's got ultimate skill damage bonuses if you go with No Witnesses. So if you decide to change builds later, you're stuck with a whole lot of gear with ultimate skill damage, which depends on this No Witnesses legendary node. For the glyph, versatility is a good option here. Versatility will improve the strength of the surrounding damage and survivability nodes in whichever board you decide to use this in, and it will boost your damage on your Rain of Arrows and your imbuements as well. Board number 5 is Cheap Shot with Combat. Cheap Shot has a lot of damage nodes and has some armor nodes spread out throughout the board that are worth picking up as well. You'll also want to pick up the legendary node for this board as well for that up to 25% additional damage when there's crowd controlled enemies nearby. The combat glyph is still going to be very good in the next patch, with crit damage numbers buffed by 100% per +5 int node. I just wouldn't place as high a priority on this glyph as before. And for the last board, go with Eldritch Bounty just to get the legendary node. This perfectly ties off your Paragon board setup to give you a good damage boost with relatively few Paragon points investment to activate that node. With the next patch in mind, I would prioritize Exploit and Control glyphs to be level 15 as quickly as you can. If you can get the right vampiric powers in Season 2, then Exploit is not as important or can even be replaced completely. For this complete Paragon setup, to maximize the bonuses from all the rare nodes that we want, you'll need one one-handed weapon slot that has all stats to reach 540 intelligence and 440 strength, to reach the requirements of the highest 2 nodes in Cheap Shot and No Witnesses, and one one-handed weapon slot that has plus dexterity to reach 730 dexterity for the last node requirement in Cheap Shot, but with the damage calculation changes, I recommend getting as much dexterity that you can get on your weapon slots anyway. For leveling, I won't go into each and every skill point allocation in order, but I'll cover the key things to remember when leveling this build. Be sure to check out this video's description for the link to this build. So anyway, start things off by using combo points with Puncture and Rapid Fire. This will be a staple all the way through to level 30. You can use either Advanced Rapid Fire for more damage or Improved Rapid Fire for energy sustain, whichever one you use is up to you. Get Shadow Imbuement and Blended Shadow Imbuement as soon as you can. This will give you some AoE and make enemies vulnerable as well. Also get Poison Imbuement to help your single target damage output versus bosses. Get Rain of Arrows and Supreme Rain of Arrows as soon as you can. Pretty obvious, right? When you reach level 30, learn Preparation and switch over to Primary Forceful Arrow. Primary Forceful Arrow will become your main source of Vulnerable while using Preparation. Although it requires 3 shots to apply Vulnerable, it will apply Vulnerable to all enemies it hits in its path. As mentioned, you can either go with Precision or Close Quarters Combat for your key passive. Get either one of those as soon as you unlock your key passives. Finally, there are a few gear and Paragon milestones thereafter that will bring this build online. 1. Once you find and place your Exploit glyph, you can really fully commit to not using a basic skill anymore. Or alternatively, if you're playing the seasonal content and get the 2 vampiric powers of Curse Touch and Prey on the Weak, you can ditch your basic skill and even Exploit glyph. When you've reached this stage, you should now be using your final 6 skills: Rapid Fire, Rain of Arrows, Shadow and Poison Imbuements, Dash, and Concealment. 2. After finding either Penitent Greaves or Word of Akan, you'll now have access to cold damage. You can choose to respec all of your points away from Concussive into Frigid Finesse. Once again, if you decide to use Flicker Step instead of Penitent Greaves, then your only source of chill is from Word of Akan, so Frigid Finesse won't come online as often. For playstyle, you want to either use Shadow or Poison Imbuement at the start of each fight, and blast away with Rapid Fire to mow down enemies as quickly as you can during the vulnerability window. Try and save your Rain of Arrows for very large groups or when you see more than one elite enemy. Normally it's risky to run into a new fight with Concealment, but if you plan on burning Rain of Arrows to open up the fight, you'll instantly get Concealment off cooldown again, so that you can get yourself out of hard crowd control if that ever happens to you. If you're playing without the Exploit glyph, then running into the fight with Concealment is going to help you with your vulnerable uptime for your energy sustain. Also, in the same vein, try casting Shadow or Poison Imbuement just before casting Rain of Arrows. You will instantly get your Imbuement off cooldown again, which basically gives you 2 extra Imbuement attacks for free. When you cast Rain of Arrows, anything hit by it will be knocked down and frozen. Use this golden opportunity to unload Rapid Fire onto each elite when you can to make the rest of the fight much less dangerous. In most cases, you should be able to mop up large mobs of enemies with Rain of Arrows with follow-up Rapid Fires no problem. Just be mindful of any on-death effects that can come about quickly while mopping up mobs after Rain of Arrows. For bosses, try and time your cooldown skills just before entering the boss room with Concealment, Poison Imbuement and Rain of Arrows ready to use. Cast Poison Imbuement and then charge into the boss fight. Once you reach the boss, burn up your Poison Imbuement and then Shadow Imbuement in the first few seconds of the fight when Exploit is triggered. After Vulnerable is worn off, cast and then attack with Concealment to apply 6 more seconds of Vulnerable on the boss. Immediately from there, cast Rain of Arrows to get all of your skills off of cooldown, then unload another round of Poison and Shadow Imbuement on the boss during the current vulnerable window. Keep an eye on whether the boss is still vulnerable. The moment you notice vulnerable wear off, cast Concealment and then attack again for another 6 seconds vulnerable window. Maximize these vulnerable windows by spamming Rapid Fire and Imbuements, remembering that vulnerable helps sustain your energy levels on top of them obviously taking more damage from you. And finally, I'll briefly cover the seasonal vampiric powers for this build. While we haven't seen the final stats on these powers, the 5 powers I'm eyeing on for this build are Anticipation to reduce the cooldown on Rain of Arrows, Accursed Touch and Prey on the Weak as mentioned earlier as the build's vulnerable source, Ravenous for the attack speed bonus for our Rapid Fire, and Flowing Veins for increased damage with our Poison Imbuement. So there we have it guys. I hope I've covered enough information about this build to help you get started making one of my favourite builds in Diablo 4 so far. If you've enjoyed watching this video, make sure you hit that like button. If you've got any questions about this build at all, be sure to leave a comment down below or hit me up on Discord. To look out for more of my videos in the future, be sure to hit that subscribe button, making sure you also hit that notification bell as well. Anyway, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.